Many people know that strangers can make life a living hell, but unfortunately, loved ones are also capable of this. Sometimes, cruelty and the desire to control everything lead to ruined destinies, even to deaths. John Edwards was born on July 12, 1950, in the small town of Broken Hill in Australia. As a child, he was abused by his alcoholic parents. At the age of 17, John stole his mother's car and ran away from home, leaving behind a short farewell letter. It was never possible to bring him back. He left almost all his belongings behind and no longer wanted to contact his family. He began working to earn his living, changing professions and fields several times until he became interested in an offer from the Australian Department of Defense. In June of the third year, he joined the famous Green Berets. John served in the Army until his 8th year, when he was finally transferred to the Army Reserve. His career had its ups and downs. He was involved in real missions and performed well. During his service, John had serious relationships with 5 women, resulting in 8 children. For privacy reasons, the names of most of these women are not mentioned. His first serious relationship was at the age of 18. In 1968, the couple married, and the marriage produced 2 children, a son and a daughter. The first wife described their life together as a normal marriage, but sometimes John was a bit arrogant. For example, he limited the amount of money she could spend and could become irritable on the spot. Despite these manipulative traits, his wife was satisfied with everything, at least until the 7th year of their marriage. Together with the children, they went on vacation to the United States of America. Sometime after, the wife noticed that John was constantly corresponding with another woman he had met in Boston. The wife decided to end the marriage as she could not forgive the infidelity. John stayed with his lover in the United States. He wanted to keep his children with him, but the ex-wife did not allow this and took them with her. In the 7th year, he married for the 2nd time, this time with a woman from Boston. But they soon separated again because the wife was not satisfied with the man's aggressive behavior. John returned as a loner to his homeland, as he never had success. Therefore, he decided to contact his former wife. He tried to obtain custody of his children, but all he could achieve were weekend visits. Life experience taught John nothing. He remained the aggressor, and it seemed that his trip to the States only worsened the ex-military man's behavior. Gradually, the son and daughter became afraid of their father. His temper and relationship with his ex-wife deteriorated. John's behavior got out of control. Gradually, his children lost the desire to meet with their father because he was violent. But John believed that everything was his former wife's fault. In his opinion, it was the first wife who had caused such a rift in the relationships with the children. Therefore, he became angry and constantly called her, making threats. The man blamed everyone but himself for his ongoing life problems. His behavior towards the children did not improve. The son and daughter were very afraid of John and tried to avoid contact with their biological father at every opportunity. However, he insisted on the meetings. In 1977, John had a new girlfriend. The couple quickly began living together, and after 2 years of this relationship, a daughter was born. In 1984, they married. A son was born, but again, everything was unfavorable. During this time, John's third wife was severely harassed. His cruelty and aggressiveness became increasingly apparent. Even before the birth of their first son, she was pregnant, but her husband beat her so badly that she lost the child. John's outbursts of anger became increasingly frightening. He hit the woman, threw objects at her, and even threatened to set the shared house on fire while she slept. At the end of the 7th year, the situation became so unbearable that the woman decided to leave the tyrant. But she was afraid to say this directly. She feared her husband would kill her. She gathered the children and took the belongings she had prepared in advance. The woman waited until he took a shower one day. She thought this was the perfect opportunity to save herself and the children. She climbed over the fence with the children and, with the help of neighbors, notified the police. The man was arrested. In the meantime, the woman and the children had fled to the city and believed themselves safe. In fact, this report to law enforcement was by no means the first. The police had been dealing with this family for a long time, but John skillfully manipulated the victim, allowing him to evade responsibility and continue to oppress all those close to him. All of John's children spoke of the cruelty, the aggressive outbursts, and the moral pressure their father exerted. They were practically ignored by social services. John already had 2 daughters and 2 sons from 2 different women, and with both, he engaged in custody battles. Despite numerous allegations of abuse by his ex-wives and the children's reluctance to see their father, he managed to obtain permission to have contact with them. The sons and daughters were obliged to spend 3 evenings a week with their father, even though they obviously resisted. Social services remained inactive. The women claimed they had received threats and feared for the children's lives. Close family members confirmed that the man behaved inappropriately and aggressively, but the justice system ignored all these circumstances again. In December, the first wife finally obtained a restraining order against John. The reason was that he had unlawfully taken his daughter from school and then held her against her will for several days. Something similar had happened to the son before, but the police believed that the biological father had done nothing wrong. He had only tried to build a relationship with the children in this way. Eventually, the first wife managed to completely sever communication with the inappropriate man. At this point, his first daughter was 11 years old, so she could decide for herself whether she wanted to maintain contact with her father. As expected, she broke off all contact with him and simply ignored all his attempts to reach her. After the restraining order was obtained, the family breathed a sigh of relief. The third ex-wife, however, continued to feel under pressure and had no way to protect herself from her ex-husband. In the meantime, John did not miss any opportunities to build his private life. The man began a relationship with a 21-year-old woman. In 1999, she gave birth to a son from this cruel manipulator. By this time, their relationship had long ended. It seemed she could thereby escape the problems of other women, but she was mistaken. He began to harass her and claimed he wanted to maintain a relationship with his child. After some time, the young woman again succumbed to the manipulator's influence and resumed close contact. John promised to make amends. Of course, these were all standard manipulation tricks. Meanwhile, he had become very cruel and aggressive again. So the next victim of the sadist quickly recognized her mistake. The new woman and the son moved in with John and then moved out again. Living with a tyrant led to great stress. She became very thin and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but she finally managed to pull herself together and eventually left with her child in her arms. The woman turned to the police in hopes of obtaining protection. With the support of foundations, she managed to get a house into which she moved with her child and hid from John. As with the previous women, this did not stop the tyrant. He found out where she lived, kept coming by, tried to break down the door, and threatened her. With difficulty, John tried several times to kidnap her son. Eventually, he forced the woman to grant him joint custody, so the boy regularly went to his father's house, where the 2 children of his third wife also appeared. When the children grew up, they decided first to break off the relationship with their father. In 1999, the tireless John married again. As a skilled manipulator, he knew how to charm women and surround them with care and love. At that time, none of them recognized the true nature of the cunning man. His new wife became pregnant. This time, John's behavior changed dramatically, but not for the better. He asked her to terminate the pregnancy, but the wife did not obey. This threw the man into a frenzy. He provoked another conflict, attacked the woman, pushed her down the stairs, and beat her for a long time with his hands and feet. Apparently, the perpetrator wanted to get rid of the child himself in this way. The woman claimed that with each blow, he tried to hit her stomach. Despite his efforts, she managed to defend herself, and the baby survived. After the birth, John's next wife ran away and stayed in women's shelters, so her husband could not reach her. Nevertheless, he managed to find her and organize meetings. Over the course of a year, he constantly threatened her, demanded she return, and announced he would kidnap the child. And so the next victim of the manipulator went to court to obtain a divorce and sole custody of the child. The proceedings were concluded in her favor in September 2002. Unfortunately, in 2008, this woman by John was diagnosed with an incurable disease. By September, she had already passed away. Thus, John was granted custody of his 8-year-old son. By this time, the man already had 6 children from 4 different women, each of whose lives he had ruined. But John Edwards was not ready to stop there. In October 2000, the 50-year-old John met the 19-year-old Olga from Russia on a dating website. He was very nice and courteous, she said, showered her with compliments, and told her how beautiful life was in his homeland. So their romance began. At his invitation, Olga followed to Australia and decided to get to know John. In August 2001, she immediately moved in with him, and on November 10th, they married. Their son Jack was born in September 2002 and daughter Jennifer in August 2004. The children Jack and Jennifer lived with their parents in their house in the suburb of Pennant Hills in Sydney. It was a quiet, cozy area with much natural beauty and a close-knit local community. In the relationship with his young wife, there was nothing new. John was just as abusive towards Olga as he had been towards his previous wives and tried to control her every move. Unlike the other victims, the Russian immigrant had no way to defend herself. She could not run anywhere or turn to anyone. The circumstances forced Olga to tolerate and smooth over every angle as best she could. At the slightest disobedience, John threatened to take the children away from her and deport her back to Russia. Of course, the woman was in a very vulnerable position and was afraid of losing her children, so she endured everything. The man took control of the financial area, including his wife's salary, controlled the money, and began to dictate what she should wear and how she should look. He liked to exert moral pressure on her and bring her to tears. The manipulator provoked situations in which the young woman was ready to apologize for everything in tears as long as the abuse stopped. Olga and John's son, Jack, was headstrong but kind and free-spirited, a lively boy who loved sports and computer games. Despite his firm outlook on life, he was friendly and got along with everyone around him. When choosing his friends, Jack was selective, but for his loved ones, he was ready for anything, which he repeatedly demonstrated in life. His sister Jennifer was more reserved and quieter than her older brother. The girl spent hours reading books, loved animals, and ice skating. As Jennifer grew up, she had a dog named Max and a rabbit as pets. She spent hours playing with her pets. Riding the wave of love for little creatures, Jennifer dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, which she repeatedly told her family and at school. When their son Jack was about 10 years old, John began to exert moral pressure on his son, following exactly the same principle as with all his wives. Since the boy did not obey and only reluctantly complied with his father, he applied various sadistic techniques to inflict severe pain without leaving traces. For example, he broke his fingers with heavy objects. These abuses lasted for years and went so far that the boy lived in constant fear. He repeatedly tried to call the police, but his mother stopped him each time because she was afraid of losing her children. The boy began sleeping with a bat in his room. Only when he hid it under his pillow did he feel safe and could sleep. All the while, his sister Jennifer also witnessed these incidents. In 2015, she began sleeping with a knife under her pillow. It is hard to imagine an environment where children needed weapons to feel safe. During the same period, a family trip to Paris took place, during which there was a physical altercation between Jack and his father. The teenager ran out of the hotel, but his father caught up with him on the street and began beating him, pushing him against a wall and choking him. The situation got out of control, so much so that bystanders had to intervene. Afterwards, Jack wanted to call the police again, but his mother begged him not to. Again, the boy obeyed his mother. The incidents continued, and each time the man's outbursts of anger became more severe. Finally, in December 2015, Olga said she wanted to file for divorce. She could no longer tolerate such behavior. John began to apologize and begged her to stay, promising to change his behavior. The young woman gave him another chance, but in reality, things only got worse. In January 2016, the worried Olga turned to the police because her son had disappeared. Jack was reported missing. Only a few hours later, the police found him. It turned out that the teenager had run away from home and did not want to return, trying to save himself by doing the same thing John had once done to escape his family. Despite the obvious danger, the schoolboy was brought back to his family. The situation escalated further until the young woman finally made her final decision in March 2016. On March 11th, she left the city with the children and went to a neighboring town where she stayed with acquaintances. She was now aware of the tendency towards stalking that her husband had vividly demonstrated with her and his ex-wives. Olga feared his appearance in her life and asked them not to reveal her whereabouts. Nevertheless, John appeared on the doorstep of the house where his wife and children were hiding from him. In April 2016, the process between Olga and John began. The woman and her children applied for a restraining order against the father to protect themselves. John did not remain idle either. In the hearing, he reported the dangers the children were allegedly exposed to while they were with their mother without him. During this time, he also sought out a psychiatrist. He was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. However, the psychotherapist concluded that the man was generally fine. In his conclusion, he pointed to post-traumatic stress disorder. John used the whole situation to prove that he was working on himself and trying to cope with the consequences of the problems he had suffered. He referred to his difficult childhood. Olga lived in another city. The refugees were forced to move several times, so the tyrant could not find them. Nevertheless, the court decided that the son's residential address had to be communicated to the father, but it was temporarily decided that John should not come closer than 500 meters to Olga and the children. In reality, this played little role, as he kept following them and trying to make contact. Once, he came to Jennifer's school and tried to give her a dog, and later he met Jack at the train station and wanted to give him an apology letter. At the same time, John hired a private detective to keep an eye on his family. Later, the man allegedly ran into Olga by chance when he came to the studio where she was doing yoga. The incident occurred in February 2017. According to a confession he later made to the police, John regularly came to the fitness studio and worked out there. The staff believed he only came to the gym to ogle the women. He behaved strangely and inappropriately, which drew attention. The police ignored Olga's claim that he had violated the restraining order and simply believed John that it was an accident. In contrast, she insisted that the whole thing was a clear case of harassment, but it was as if she were not being heard. By October 2017, John had expanded his collection with 2 revolvers and a semi-automatic pistol. Then he went to the police station and claimed that people were wrongfully accusing him. In this way, he wanted to improve his chances of getting custody of his children, but it didn't help him. In February 2018, the court decided that Olga would have sole custody of the children and that they would not have to have contact with their father unless they wanted to. Naturally, neither Jack nor Jennifer showed any desire to have contact with their father. Olga and the children finally breathed a sigh of relief. They thought they had managed to pull themselves together, but in reality, the battle had just begun. On June 25, 2018, John Edwards rented a large limousine until July 7th and kept an eye on Olga and the children. He consulted a computer expert and deleted all information on his hard drive and in his browser. On July 4th, he retrieved the pistols from his gun cabinet. Apparently, he was very agitated as he closed the door so tightly that it jammed. A specialist was later required to open the lock. July 5, 2018, was a completely normal day for Olga and her children. She took them to school and then drove to work herself. That day, John left his friend Peter a large envelope labeled, "In case something happens to me." Additionally, there was a note stating that he should not open the envelope before a certain time. The friend obeyed. After the tragedy, Peter found several smaller envelopes inside with a will and letters, as well as $533 in cash. At 4:45 p.m., Jennifer got off the school bus and headed home. She was unaware that her father had followed her. Around 5 p.m., Jennifer's neighbor heard several loud bangs. He ran onto the porch and saw John coming out of the house. The neighbor tried to find out what had happened, but John simply got into his car without a word and drove away. The man knew about the problems the family had been struggling with for years. The neighbor opened the door and called out to the house's occupants, but no one answered. He notified the police. The police officers arrived at the house and went inside. They found 13-year-old Jennifer and 15-year-old Jack lifeless in the son's room under a computer desk. The children had been shot, probably trying to hide from the murderer. The police found Jack lying on Jennifer. It was the boy's last heroic act, trying to shield and save his little sister, which, however, he did not succeed in doing. Jack was shot 6 times in the back and chest. Most of the shots were fired from a distance. However, a contact wound was found on the boy's shoulder, indicating that the shot was fired with the muzzle pressed against his body. Jennifer suffered 16 gunshot wounds to the chest, abdomen, arms, and legs. At this point, Olga returned to the house, unaware of what had happened. Police cars were parked around the house, and a helicopter circled over the houses. She was told that her son and daughter were dead and that her ex-husband was being sought by the police. Olga immediately stated that the only person capable of such a thing was John Edwards. The police kept Olga's house under surveillance, believing she would be the man's 3rd victim who would return to her. However, he did not appear. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, the police arrived at the suspect's apartment. As it turned out, the 67-year-old John had returned home after the massacre of the children and shot himself in the head. His neighbor said that he went for a walk with his dog around 6 p.m. At that time, he heard a loud bang from the direction of Edward's house. Later, the man took the dog home because the animal was restless. When he returned to see what had happened, he saw a broken window and could no longer reach John. In the pocket of his clothing, a crumpled piece of paper was found with Jennifer's bus schedule every day to and from school. In the garage, investigators found a toolbox with shredded documents, burnt pieces of paper, a destroyed tablet, and a mobile phone. 2 handguns were found in the house, which were used in the shootings of the children. The ballistic examination confirmed that these were the weapons used in the double murder. According to the investigations, the reason for the murder was the loss of custody. At this point, all of John's older children had already broken off contact with their father. All his previous wives had obtained restraining orders against him. John had lost control over his last wife, his son, and his daughter. This might have been the last chance for the manipulator. Having lost everything, he decided to kill his son and daughter. However, this was not a momentary impulse of madness. John carefully prepared for the act. First, he bought 3 rifles but quickly realized that they were too bulky to use inconspicuously for a murder. Then he bought pistols and revolvers. Next, he calculated the children's daily routines, school bus schedules, and Olga's work hours. He also entered numerous internet search terms. John deleted the information and destroyed everything he used. Obviously, he wanted to eliminate traces of the preparation for the crimes, down to the smallest details like the browser history. Some of the information was, however, recovered, but the bloody story was not yet over. Olga was devastated, emotionally shattered, and unable to cope with the loss of her children. Her mother realized that her daughter needed support and flew from Russia to her. Her mother gave her full support and tried to bring her back to life. But the woman could not stay in Australia for long. After 4 months, the mother had to return home. Olga refused to follow her mother and decided to stay in Australia. Despite her mother's pleas, Olga took her own life 5.5 months after the killing of her 2 children. During this time, she continued to live in the house where her ex-husband had shot her son and daughter and slept in her son's bed. Her body was found there by a neighbor. Close family members believe that Olga blamed herself for her children's death all along and took this desperate step. The heartbreaking story of Olga and her children became public knowledge. Residents asked legitimate questions. How could law enforcement allow this cruel tragedy despite numerous restraining orders? Why did the children, who were subjected to daily beatings and forced to sleep with weapons, have to go to such lengths to isolate themselves from their tyrannical father? And it didn't help them. The authorities completely ignored most of the allegations made by all of John's ex-wives, a man with obvious problems. How many women and children in this country must still suffer because law enforcement has failed to protect them from stalkers? The state police department conducted an internal investigation to find out which reasons played a decisive role and could have led to this terrible incident. All this happened under public pressure, fearing that they would try to cover up the incident. It was found that several law enforcement officers had acted negligently. They failed to record reports of harassment during yoga classes and attempts to have contact with children despite court orders. The man received no punishment for his systematic offenses. On the contrary, the ex-military seemed to find much more hearing than the victims of his tortures themselves. Even during the custody dispute, Olga encountered resistance. The lawyer, for example, did not consider John dangerous and completely ignored the existing restraining orders that all his ex-wives had applied for. After an investigation, proceedings were initiated regarding the behavior of the lawyer who was involved in the custody cases. For some reason, the defender ignored all the teenagers' claims that John had systematically morally abused them. The lawyer stated that he did not give weight to these statements because of their age. In reality, his behavior tied John's hands and helped the tyrant implement his criminal plans. The tragedy of Olga, Jack, and Jennifer has highlighted the vulnerability of the existing system in Australia and triggered a global reassessment of the care and social protection system. Efforts have begun to modernize the system, which could improve the response to domestic violence. Until now, the firearm registry was not linked to the list of offenders. This has become an urgent problem that should actually be solved, but the work is progressing slowly. So far, no global changes have been made in this direction. The relatives of the victims of this tragedy are striving for justice and the conviction of all those who acted negligently and made mistakes. Nevertheless, Olga's relatives have not achieved any success. John's ex-wives and Olga's parents are sure that the horrific massacre could have been prevented. Unfortunately, the system did not show the right interest in this situation. The negligence of social services and the police not only allowed John to take the lives of his 2 children, but also drove their mother to suicide. John Edwards will forever remain a tyrant who did not have the courage to leave this world without being held accountable for his actions. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.
On January 13, 2014, Richard Berman received a frightening email from his ex-wife, Jennifer. In it, she warned him that something terrible was about to happen. Every action has consequences. The worse the action, the more terrible the consequences. So do not be surprised by what awaits you, because deep inside, you know that punishment is inevitable. You deserve it. Alarmed, Richard dropped everything and rushed to his ex-wife's home, hoping that he could still prevent the unthinkable. However, when he arrived, he discovered that it was already too late. Richard and Jennifer Berman met in 1990 at a party hosted by mutual friends. At the time, he was 27 years old and she was 24. Richard was immediately attracted to the pretty, slender blonde woman. 1 month later, they began dating. Richard was still at the beginning of his career with a real estate company, while Jennifer worked as a nurse at a hospital. Their modest income was enough only for a small apartment in West Palm Beach, Florida, where they moved in 1991. Richard soon proposed to Jennifer, and she happily agreed to marry him. In 1992, they celebrated an elaborate wedding in Miami. The couple believed that a long and happy family life lay ahead of them. Reality, however, proved to be more complicated. The first years of the Berman marriage were marked by happiness and harmony. Over time, however, Richard became increasingly jealous. One day, while visiting his wife at work, he saw how attentive and caring Jennifer was toward one of her patients. Richard began to suspect that there might be more than a professional relationship between Jennifer and the patient. His jealousy grew from day to day, and he eventually insisted that Jennifer leave her hospital job and become a homemaker. By then, Richard's income had increased significantly, so the loss of Jennifer's salary did not create immediate financial difficulties for the family. After leaving the hospital, Jennifer initially felt uncomfortable because she was now completely dependent on her husband. Over time, however, she adjusted to her new role and began discovering new interests and activities. In 1994, the couple purchased a luxurious million-dollar property with the help of a mortgage in a historic and prestigious area of West Palm Beach. Jennifer enthusiastically devoted herself to decorating the new family home. The Bermans had planned to have children since their wedding, but for a long time, their wish remained unfulfilled. Only in 1997, after lengthy and expensive treatment, did Jennifer become pregnant. Their long-awaited son, Alexander, known as Alex, was born first. Their daughter, Jacqueline, also known as Jackie, was born the following year. Jennifer adored her children and devoted herself completely to raising them. She was passionate about classical music and was delighted to discover that her sons and daughter shared her enthusiasm. As teenagers, Alex and Jackie attended the selective Alexander W. Dreyfus School of Arts in West Palm Beach. Both children displayed exceptional musical ability. Alex was an accomplished cellist, while Jackie excelled as a violinist and was also an outstanding student. Other parents regarded Alex and Jackie as role models for their own children. Jennifer devoted herself fully to supporting their development. She drove them to school, picked them up after classes, and accompanied them to rehearsals, concerts, and performances. Alex and Jackie frequently performed as members of school ensembles. Meanwhile, Richard Berman dedicated himself to his work so that he could provide his wife and children with a comfortable, worry-free life. At first, he succeeded. Step by step, he advanced professionally and eventually became a leading figure at the real estate company, where he had begun his career many years earlier. In 2007, however, the mortgage crisis struck the United States and caused serious problems throughout the real estate market. Mass layoffs, falling property values, bank failures, and widespread economic hardship followed. Richard's company did not close, but his income fell drastically. He could no longer support the family's accustomed standard of living by himself. Although he had promised Jennifer years earlier that she would never have to work again, he was now forced to ask her to find a job because they otherwise risked losing their luxurious home. By then, Jennifer had not worked for more than 13 years. She had become so accustomed to being a homemaker that she immediately rejected Richard's request that she return to hospital work. This led to growing tension in their marriage. 1 year later, in 2008, Richard filed for divorce. The unexpected development suddenly made Jennifer realize that she would not be able to maintain her standard of living if the marriage ended. Once she understood this, she agreed to return to work and accepted a nursing position. When Richard saw that she had changed her mind, he withdrew the divorce petition. The couple continued living together, but their relationship was no longer as harmonious as it had once been. One of Jennifer's friends later said that the trust between them had disappeared. From the outside, they still appeared to be an exemplary family, but appearances were deceptive. Jennifer believed that her husband had betrayed her. In her view, Richard had first pressured her to abandon her career and become dependent on him, only to later force her to return to work when the family's financial situation deteriorated. Her trust in him had been permanently damaged. Time passed, and the economic crisis continued affecting the Berman family's finances. In 2010, they were forced to sell their luxurious million-dollar home, pay their debts, and move into another mortgaged property in a less prestigious part of West Palm Beach. The couple became increasingly estranged. They lived more like neighbors, sharing the same roof, and remained together mainly because of their children. Richard began having affairs. Whether Jennifer also had relationships outside the marriage remained unclear. For Jennifer, however, Richard's infidelity became the final breaking point. In August 2012, she learned that Richard was involved with a much younger woman. Jennifer filed for divorce and told him that he was a traitor who had to leave the house immediately. Richard reacted angrily. He was unwilling to leave a property on which he was still making mortgage payments. He said that he did not want a divorce and was satisfied with the existing arrangement. He allegedly told Jennifer, "You will not get a cent from me. If you think that after the divorce I will give you the house, continue paying the mortgage, and also make support payments, you are mistaken." The divorce proceedings continued for a long time. Neither Richard nor Jennifer was willing to give in. They remained in the same house with their son, Alex, and their daughter, Jackie. During this period, Richard reportedly placed significant pressure on Jennifer in an attempt to make her move out. He provoked arguments, created conflicts, and repeatedly disturbed the household. On one occasion, while the children were visiting their grandmother, Richard invited unfamiliar women into the house and spent the night with them, while Jennifer was forced to remain in a neighboring room and listen to what was happening. Jennifer was devastated. She had never imagined that her husband could behave in such a way. She filed a police complaint and accused Richard of subjecting her to emotional pressure. She hoped to obtain a court order preventing him from approaching her and the children, but she lost the case. Richard hired experienced attorneys and secured the right to continue living in the jointly owned home. The only point on which its parents still appeared to agree was that they should try to protect their son and daughter from their open conflict. That fragile arrangement lasted until the spring of 2013, when Richard reportedly held another gathering with questionable guests. Jennifer finally lost patience and told him that she would temporarily move with the children into her mother's home. Jennifer's mother also lived in West Palm Beach. She was elderly and seriously ill, and almost all of her pension was spent on medication and medical appointments. Jennifer knew that she could not rely on her mother for financial support. At the time, Richard continued delaying the divorce proceedings, which meant that Jennifer was not yet receiving regular post-divorce support. The costs of caring for Alex and Jackie therefore fell largely on her. In April 2013, Jennifer reportedly pawned an expensive watch that she had inherited from her late father. She used the money to buy clothing for the children and fuel for her car. She was desperate and ended her relationship with her divorce attorney because she could no longer afford the legal fees. At the same time, she petitioned the court and requested financial assistance from Richard, but he remained unwilling to compromise. Jennifer continued working as a hospital nurse. She performed her duties well, but financial hardship forced her to take additional work. At night, she cared for an elderly man. She worked long hours almost every day. At that point, Jennifer did not yet know what further ordeal awaited her. In September 2013, her mother's health deteriorated dramatically. Only a few days later, the elderly woman died. Jennifer was already emotionally exhausted, and her mother's death affected her deeply. She fell into a severe depression and was barely able to attend her hospital shifts regularly. As her ability to work declined, her debts began growing rapidly. The Berman divorce was finalized in December 2013. Jennifer hoped that she would receive her share of the jointly owned house and that Richard would begin making support payments. She believed that her life might finally improve, but events did not unfold as she had expected. Richard's business was flourishing by then. He was a successful real estate broker, involved in selling multi-million-dollar properties in South Florida. Following the divorce, he was required to provide support, but the source states that his officially reported monthly income was only $288. As a result, he was reportedly ordered to pay only the statutory minimum amount for each child. Richard also maintained health insurance for Alex and Jackie and assisted Jennifer with maintenance of her car. Regarding the family's jointly owned house, Jennifer believed that Richard used his connections in the real estate industry to delay its sale. She could have attempted to force a faster sale through legal action, but she no longer had the money to hire attorneys. Shortly afterward, Richard reportedly acquired a new luxury home worth approximately $1.5 million and a new Bentley through his real estate company. At the same time, he did not neglect his children. He gave them expensive gifts and took them to restaurants and various events. It is possible that he hoped Alex and Jackie would choose to live with him in his new home. He made every effort to show his teenage children that he could provide them with a comfortable life. The conflict between the former spouses was financially unequal. Jennifer's total monthly income was approximately $2,000. She paid for food, household expenses, and the many costs associated with her children's musical education and school activities. She was barely able to survive and had almost no money left for herself. Jennifer continued living with Alex and Jackie in her late mother's house, but she soon received another painful surprise. She discovered that the property was heavily encumbered by debt. Her mother had taken out a substantial loan to pay for medical treatment while fighting for her life, but she had hidden this information from Jennifer. In December 2013, Jennifer received a letter from the bank informing her that she would have to leave the property in February 2014 because it would be sold to satisfy the debt. After everything that had happened, increasingly dark thoughts began forming in Jennifer's mind. Near the end of 2013, she moved with Alex and Jackie out of her late mother's house and returned to the now empty former family home where the four Bermans had once lived together happily. During a conversation shortly before New Year's Day, Jennifer told a friend that she was exhausted and could no longer see any purpose in living. Her friend strongly advised her to see a psychiatrist. Jennifer followed the advice and consulted a doctor who recommended several psychotherapy sessions. She had neither the money nor the time to attend them, however, so her treatment was limited to antidepressant medication. Unfortunately, the prescribed medication did not improve her psychological or emotional condition. According to the source narrative, the final emotional blow came when Alex and Jackie said that they wanted a better life and wished to move in with their father. During the first days of January 2014, Jennifer allegedly used almost all of her remaining money to obtain a rifle and ammunition. Some details in the original account concerning the weapon could not be independently confirmed. During the night of January 12th into January 13th, Jennifer waited until Alex and Jackie had fallen asleep. She took the weapon, entered her son's room, and then went into her daughter's room. She later Richard a message containing the words, "You deserve it." She then fired the weapon once more. Richard did not read the message until several hours later. He called Jennifer's number, but nobody answered. He hurriedly gathered his belongings, got into his car, and drove toward his ex-wife's house. It was approximately 8 o'clock in the morning. While driving, he called emergency services. Despite repeated warnings from the dispatcher to wait for police, Richard entered the house. Inside, he encountered a horrifying scene. Richard went into Alex's bedroom. As he entered, he heard the alarm clock ringing, but his son lay motionless in bed. When Richard moved closer, he saw blood coming from the boy's ear. He could barely understand what he was seeing. He then found Jackie in her bedroom. She was also lying in bed and had suffered a gunshot wound to the head. Jennifer was found in the kitchen. Blood spatter was visible on the walls, and the rifle lay near her. 2 empty wine bottles stood on a round glass table. Richard also found a note that his ex-wife had left behind. The note said, "I feel for those who loved us and who are now hurting." Jennifer had previously sent a similar message to a cousin with whom she had been very close. In that message, she wrote that she no longer had the strength to deal with the difficulties of life and intended to end her life and take her children with her. The police officers who arrived at the home confirmed Richard's worst fears. All 3 were dead. Alex was 16 years old, Jackie was 15, and Jennifer was 48. While reviewing records from the divorce proceedings, investigators found that Jennifer had repeatedly complained that Richard had left her without sufficient financial resources. She said that she had forced to sell personal belongings in order to purchase food. Her statements also alleged that while she and Richard were still living under the same roof during the divorce, he bought food and everyday necessities and hid them in his room so that neither Jennifer nor the children could access them. She claimed that he even hid toilet paper from them. While living separately from her husband, Jennifer's monthly expenses were approximately $4,500, while her income was only about half that amount. Her debts therefore increased month after month. The source also states that Richard had stopped making mortgage payments on the family home during the divorce proceedings. Jennifer planned to sell the property after the divorce, but it was heavily mortgaged. According to the account, her total liabilities to banks exceeded $600,000. Relatives believed that the financial situations contributed to the terrible tragedy in the Berman family. A cousin of Jennifer's, who wished to remain anonymous, said that she had experienced dark thoughts before. In his opinion, Jennifer had convinced herself that she could no longer overcome the difficulties in her life and had finally given up. He believed that she had not acted purely out of revenge, but had persuaded herself that she was doing what was right because she could no longer see a future. "This is madness," Jennifer's cousin said when commenting on the tragedy. Neighbors said that both Jennifer and Richard had appeared to be caring parents. They had rarely been seen arguing before the divorce, but after the separation began, there were indeed disputes and scandals between them. One neighbor said that he had seen and spoken with Jennifer 2 days before the tragedy. She appeared agitated and deeply sad. There was something unreal about her expression. She did not seem like herself, and her eyes appeared empty. Jennifer reportedly offered to sell her house to the neighbor for a very low price. She needed money as quickly as possible to pay her debts. At the end of the conversation, she allegedly said, "I am ready to leave for a new world." The neighbor said goodbye to Jennifer and later told his wife about the strange conversation. He expressed concern, but his wife believed that they should not interfere in another family's affairs. Richard suffered profoundly after losing his son and daughter. According to some reports, he struggled with alcohol for a period of time, but later began rebuilding his life. In an interview, Richard said, "All of this is terrible and horrifying. Jennifer was once a good wife and mother, but the divorce pushed her out of balance. To take revenge on me, she took away the people I loved most. It is the most selfish and terrible crime imaginable." In 2014, Richard began raising money in memory of Alex and Jackie to support students at the Alexander W. Dreyfus School of the Arts. The initiative was said to help students obtain instruments and participate in performance trips. Later accounts reported that Richard remarried, continued working in real estate in West Palm Beach, and remained involved in preserving the memory of his children. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves. The year 2005 brought a series of shocking events to the people of Mexico. In October and December, black suitcases containing human remains were discovered in public places. On the 23rd of January, 2006, a 25-year-old man named Raul Ociel Marroquin Reyes was arrested in Mexico City and later presented to the media as the person responsible. He was a thin man with an intense and intimidating stare. At the time, he told reporters that he did not regret his actions. On the contrary, he claimed that he had performed a service for society and described his methods with frightening calmness. Raul Ociel Marroquin Reyes was born on the 1st of September 1980 in Tampico, Tamaulipas. His father was reportedly strict and authoritarian and frequently mistreated him. According to accounts about his childhood, His father held deeply hostile views toward homosexual people and passed those attitudes on to his son. Raul grew up believing that such people were harmful to society. As a young man, he entered the Mexican army. He studied military medicine for approximately 1 year and served in the armed forces for about 4 years, eventually reaching the rank of sergeant. After leaving the army, he had already changed considerably. He developed a pronounced cruelty and suffered from severe fits of rage. After his military service, he searched for work in several places. Because he had been discharged from the army under unfavorable circumstances, however, he experienced serious difficulty finding employment. After failing to establish a stable life, he turned to robbery and violence. In 2004, he was arrested and spent approximately 14 months in prison for violent robbery. Following his release, he left Tampico and moved to Mexico City. He lived in an apartment at number 4223 on Avenida Andrés Molina Enriquez in the Asturias neighborhood. In Mexico City, he frequently visited Zona Rosa, an entertainment district filled with bars, clubs, cafes, restaurants, and nightlife venues. The area was popular among gay men, some of whom approached Raul and invited him to socialize. One day, a disturbing plan formed in his mind. Driven by anger, resentment, and a desire for money, he decided to commit an even more serious crime. He did not act alone. He was assisted by a friend named Juan Enrique Madrid Manuel. Together, they decided to kidnap people and demand money from their families. On the night of the 21st of October, 2005, the two men entered a nightclub and agreed to separate while searching for a suitable victim. Madrid Manuel met a man named Juan Carlos Alfaro Alba. He approached him, asked whether he was alone, and began a conversation. Madrid Manuel asked where Juan Carlos worked, where he came from, and how old he was. Juan Carlos said that he was from Michoacán and had arrived in Mexico City only 15 days earlier. Madrid Manuel briefly left him and went to speak with Raul. After discussing the situation, they decided that Juan Carlos would be taken to the Hotel Amazonas. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, Madrid Manuel and Juan Carlos left the club. Madrid Manuel invited him to the hotel, and Juan Carlos agreed. They entered rooms 619. Madrid Manuel went into the bathroom, and when he returned, he kissed Juan Carlos and secretly placed a tablet in his mouth. Juan Carlos initially believed that it was a mint and swallowed it. Within minutes, he lost consciousness. When he awoke, he had a rope around his neck. Madrid Manuel told him that they were on the 6th floor and threatened to throw him through the window. The kidnappers forced him to reveal personal information about his relatives so that they could demand a ransom. Juan Carlos was wrapped in a blanket and restrained with plastic ties. He remained imprisoned in the room for approximately 1 week. One day, he realized that he had been left alone. He managed to stand, reached the door, and called for help. Hotel employees discovered him and released him from his restraints. Juan Carlos contacted his family and described what had happened. He asked his brother to bring him clothing because he had been abandoned without money or personal belongings. The family later listened to recorded messages left by Raul and his accomplice. In the recordings, the kidnappers demanded 3,000 pesos for Juan Carlos's release. His mother explained that the family was experiencing financial difficulties and could not afford the requested amount. After this failed attempt, the kidnappers concluded that using hotels was too dangerous because employees could identify them. They decided to use Raul's apartment as the location for future crimes. They carefully planned their method so that they would not fail again. Raul would visit clubs in Zona Rosa, gain the trust of potential victims, and invite them to his apartment, where Madrid Manuel would be waiting. They also purchased a heavy wrought iron hook and attached it high on a living room wall. The hook would later become part of their method. 6 days later, on the 27th of October, everything was ready. On Thursday evening, Raul entered the Cabaretito Neon nightclub. After observing the customers, he approached a young man named Jonathan Razo Ayala. He selected Jonathan because he believed that the young man would be easy to overpower. Jonathan had planned to meet a friend and enter the club with him. His friend was late, however, so Jonathan decided to go inside alone. After speaking with Raul for approximately 1 hour, Jonathan accepted an invitation to visit his apartment. Before leaving, Jonathan briefly met the friend who had arrived late. The friend warned him not to go with Raul. Jonathan ignored the warning and decided to accompany him. As soon as they entered the apartment, Raul seized Jonathan. Madrid Manuel came out of another room and grabbed his arms and legs. He told Jonathan that everything would be fine and ordered him to remain calm. They carried him into another room and tied him to a bed with ropes. They questioned him about his income, property, and the financial condition of his family. They also demanded personal information about his relatives. The kidnappers decided to demand 50,000 pesos. That same night, they contacted Jonathan's parents and ordered them to transfer 4,000 pesos into their son's account. They warned his father not to tell anyone and not to contact the police. During the following days, Raul repeatedly forced Jonathan's parents to deposit additional money. Jonathan was occasionally allowed to speak with his father by telephone. On the 12th of November, after approximately 16 days in captivity, Jonathan was taken out of the room under the false promise that he was about to be released. His eyes were covered with adhesive tape, supposedly so that he would not recognize where he was being taken. The kidnappers placed a noose around his neck and attached it to the metal hook. After several minutes, Jonathan showed no signs of life. That night, his body was wrapped in plastic, forced into a tightly folded position, and placed inside a suitcase that the kidnappers had previously purchased. At approximately 8 o'clock the following morning, Raul and Madrid Manuel considered how they could remove the suitcase from the building without attracting attention. They carried it outside, while one of them wore a backpack to create the impression that they were travelers. They called a taxi and traveled approximately 15 blocks before changing vehicles in an attempt to confuse anyone who might be following them. They eventually reached the area around the Chabacano metro station. Jonathan's body was abandoned near the station, and the kidnappers escaped. The body was discovered later, but investigators initially found no evidence that immediately identified the killers. To avoid arrest, the accomplices began studying reports about crimes committed by extremist groups. They hoped to learn how to destroy evidence and mislead investigators. On Wednesday, the 30th of November, 2005, Raul returned to the same nightclub in Zona Rosa. In the restroom, he met a 31-year-old man who gave him a television station business card. The man was Ricardo Lopez Hernandez, who had visited the club with a friend. Raul spoke with Ricardo for some time and eventually invited him to his apartment. They left the club and took a taxi. Madrid Manuel was already waiting inside the apartment. Raul subdued Ricardo in the same manner used against Jonathan. Madrid Manuel joined him and tied Ricardo's hands and feet. They ordered him to remain calm and demanded information about his family. The kidnappers contacted Ricardo's relatives and initially demanded 8,000 pesos. They later ordered Ricardo to call his family from his own telephone and tell them that he was alive and that they should follow every instruction. During the telephone call, the kidnappers demanded another 4,000 pesos and explained that this was only a small portion of the total ransom. They said that if the family wanted to see Ricardo alive again, they would have to pay 120,000 pesos. Ricardo begged his relatives to use the family home as security if they could not obtain the full amount immediately. Despite the threats, the family contacted the police. Officers visited their home and explained how they should respond to the kidnappers. Between Saturday, the 3rd of December, and Thursday, the 8th of December, Ricardo's relatives received more than 20 telephone calls. Raul visited a bank and used Ricardo's identity to open 3 accounts without immediately attracting suspicion. Raul and Madrid Manuel then called the family again and asked how much money they had collected. Ricardo's father replied that they had managed to raise only 28,000 pesos. Raul provided the information for the 3 bank accounts and ordered him to deposit the money. The kidnappers promised that Ricardo would be released as soon as they withdrew it. On Friday, the 9th of December, Ricardo's family followed the instructions in the hope that he would be freed. After transferring the money, they informed Raul and waited for their son to return. By that time, however, Raul and Madrid Manuel had already decided not to keep their promise. They blindfolded Ricardo, placed a noose around his neck, and killed him using the same method they had used against Jonathan. Raul then added a deliberate piece of staging. Using a knife, he carved a pentagram into Ricardo's forehead in an attempt to make the killing appear connected to a ritual or extremist group. The kidnappers bound Ricardo's legs, arms, and head with white plastic cord, forcing his body into a tightly folded position. They wrapped him in black plastic bags and placed him inside a black suitcase. They took a taxi toward the Chabacano metro station and later changed vehicles. They continued to Avenida Miramontes, where they abandoned the suitcase. At approximately 8:57 that evening, a woman noticed the suitcase. Because it was unusually heavy, she contacted the police. Ricardo's body was discovered shortly afterward. Investigators reviewed movements connected to the bank accounts, but the inquiry initially produced no decisive result. On the 23rd of December, Ricardo's father read a newspaper report about a body found inside a suitcase. A forensic examination later confirmed that the victim was his son. On the 13th of December 2005, Raul kidnapped another man, Jose Ricardo Galindo Valdez. Raul contacted the victim's mother. She begged him not to harm her son and explained that she had no money for a ransom. For reasons that remain uncertain, Raul eventually released Jose Ricardo after threatening him and warning him to remain silent. On Friday, the 16th of December, Raul returned to the Cabritito Neon nightclub in search of more victims. By this time, he had become experienced at approaching thin men and gaining their trust. This time, he selected 2 men within a short period. He first spoke with Armando Rivas Perez, who was accompanied by friends. Their conversation was brief, but Raul obtained Armando's telephone number and arranged to meet him later for a meal. Raul then approached Victor Ángel Iván Gutiérrez Balderas. He spoke with him for a longer period and gradually gained his confidence. Raul pretended to have a romantic interest in him and invited him to spend the night at his apartment. Madrid Manuel was already waiting there. When Victor entered the apartment, the 2 men overpowered him, tied his hands and feet, and restricted his movement. They demanded the contact details of his relatives. They called Victor's family and demanded 15,000 pesos for his release. The family transferred money and reported the kidnapping to the police. Raul later met Armando near the La Viga metro station. They ate together, after which Raul invited him to the apartment. Once inside, Raul and Madrid Manuel overpowered Armando and took him into a room where Victor was already being held. The kidnappers telephoned Armando's parents. At first, the family believed that the call was a cruel joke and demanded to speak with their son. Several minutes later, the kidnappers called again, and Armando personally confirmed that he was being held against his will. He was returned to the room with Victor. His hands and feet were restrained, and his mouth was covered to prevent him from shouting or resisting. On Monday, the 19th of December, at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, Raul contacted Armando's Tong's family and provided detailed instructions for depositing 15,000 pesos. He promised that Armando would be released later that day. Armando's father, Roberto Rivas Gonzalez, went to a bank and transferred the demanded money into 2 accounts. He received no further information about his son. On the 20th of December, the kidnappers contacted Victor's parents and said that he would be released if another 15,000 pesos was paid. Victor's father followed their instructions the next day, but waited in vain for a telephone call. On Thursday, the 22nd of December, Raul and Madrid Manuel decided not to leave either captive alive. Armando was killed first, followed by Victor. Both victims were restrained and strangled in a manner similar to the previous murders. The bodies were placed inside separate suitcases. The kidnappers intended to transport them away in 2 taxis, but the suitcases were too heavy. They dragged them approximately 100 meters from the apartment building and abandoned them near a flower bed before returning to the residence. At approximately 8 o'clock that evening, the building's concierge reported the suitcases to the police. Officers secured the area and began collecting evidence. They followed marks left by the suitcase wheels on the pavement. The tracks led back toward the apartment building at number 4223. At first, the officers did not enter the building and instead questioned neighbors. Several days later, they obtained a search warrant and continued following the evidence to apartment number 2. When no one answered the door, the police forced their way inside. They discovered clear evidence that the victims had been held there. The investigators found documents connected to Juan Enrique Madrid Manuel, including records relating to his previous imprisonment and his service in the Mexican army. They also found work gloves, personal documents belonging to Ricardo Lopez Hernandez and Jonathan Razo Ayala, and bank cards obtained using the victims' identities. 3 photographs were also recovered, including a photograph of Raul with a former partner. Investigators found equipment suggesting that one of the suspects had worked in emergency medical services. They also recovered the knife believed to have been used to carve the pentagram into Ricardo's forehead. The principal suspects were no longer inside the apartment. Investigators began searching for both men and placed Raul's known locations under surveillance. On the 23rd of January, 2006, federal agents arrested Raul Ociel Marroquin Reyes in Mexico City. He was taken into custody without a violent struggle. During questioning, he admitted that he understood why he had been arrested. He also stated that he had considered additional victims and had intended to continue committing kidnappings and murders. The media later referred to him as El Sádico, meaning the sadist, and El Asesino del Arco Iris, meaning the rainbow killer. In statements made after his arrest, he repeatedly claimed that he felt no remorse. He attempted to justify the murders by saying that he had performed a service for society and by making hateful statements about gay men. He also claimed that one victim had been living with a serious illness and that killing him had prevented the disease from spreading. During court proceedings, he appeared cold and emotionally detached. His stare was repeatedly described as intimidating. In October of 2006, he received a sentence of 60 years for the kidnapping and murder of Ricardo Lopez Hernandez. In May of 2007, another sentence of 147 years was imposed for crimes against Jonathan Razo Ayala and Armando Rivas Perez. Additional judgments eventually brought his cumulative sentence to approximately 288 years for 6 kidnappings and 4 murders. He was later transferred to the Santa Marta Acatitla Penitentiary in Mexico City. His accomplice, Juan Enrique Madrid Manuel, was also convicted and received lengthy prison sentences for his participation in the crimes. Raul Ociel Marroquin Reyes was responsible for one of the most disturbing series of kidnappings and murders committed against gay men in Mexico City during the early years of the 21st century. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe. Nicali Fernanda Pogere was 15 years old. She was a schoolgirl from Mococa in the state of Sao Paulo, Brazil. School, family, and first emotion. Everything in her life was only beginning. Yet by behind the messages, romantic promises, and her visit to grandmother in Hortolandia, there was a carefully developed plan. She arrived during the school holidays, hoping to meet the boy she believed she loved. Several days later, she was found in a lagoon. Her body had been mutilated and partially dismembered, wrapped in household materials, weighed down with stones, and marked on the back with a strange inscription. This is not only a story about jealousy, but it's also about cold calculation, envy, manipulation, and an absolute disregard for human life. It is a story about minors capable of acts from which many adults would recoil, and about a legal system that, even when the full truth is known, may impose no more than 3 years of confinement in a juvenile institution. Despite her young age, people around Nicali already admired her kindness, good manners, and inner warmth. She enjoyed studying, loved drawing, and could spend hours immersed in lines and images, as though she instinctively understood that creativity could express more than words. Her notebooks were filled with sketches, while her dreams were focused on aviation. Nicali wanted to become a pilot. It was not merely a hobby or a passing fantasy. It was a genuine goal she hoped to pursue. Her family relationships were described as close and affectionate. Her mother, Priscilla Magrin, often said that she was proud of her daughter. On social media, she shared photographs of Nikali and wrote about her with tenderness and love. The teenager was often seen with relatives, friends, and classmates. People described her as sociable, open, and sincere. During the school holidays, Nikali decided to travel to her grandfather's home in Hortolandia. The city, roughly 200 kilometers from Mococa, offered her not only a change of surroundings and a chance to rest, but also the possibility of seeing someone who had become very important to her. Henrique, a 17-year-old boy from Hortolandia, was more than an old acquaintance. They had attended elementary school together when Nikali's family lived in that city. Even after she moved to Mococa, they remained in contact. They exchanged online messages, and their friendship gradually developed into deeper feelings. About 1 month before the tragedy, Nikali and Henrique began describing themselves as a couple. Their long-distance relationship developed without regular physical contact, but with a strong emotional connection. For Nikali, it was her first serious love, and she treated it sincerely. Their conversations made her feel valued and gave her something special to anticipate. As an open-hearted teenager, she did not recognize warning signs. She had no idea that behind the romantic expectations were intentions far removed from honesty. Her trip to Hortolandia was not simply a family visit. Meeting Henrique seemed like a step toward adulthood and independence. She could not have imagined that her life would end among the familiar streets of the city where she had spent part of her childhood. Henrique left a mixed impression on the people around him. Relatives described him as quiet and reserved, but also withdrawn, distant from his family, and difficult to understand. He rarely participated in family gatherings, kept to himself, and, according to relatives, preferred isolation even during serious family problems. This behavior caused unease, but no one understood how serious the danger might be until it was too late. Henrique lived with his father in a house in Hortolandia. His mother was reportedly not actively involved in his daily life. At first glance, the house where the decisive events occurred looked no different from the others nearby. Behind that ordinary exterior, however, relatives later described disturbing behavior. They alleged that Henrique had once killed the family cat, recorded the act, and then buried the animal. According to the account in the source text, only a small circle knew about this episode, and it did not trigger a serious intervention, even though it appeared to reveal cruelty and a lack of empathy. Another important person in Henrique's life was Evelyn, a 14-year-old girl with whom he had maintained a long but highly unstable relationship. Their relationship had lasted for about 1 year and was marked by repeated arguments, jealous outbursts, separations, and reconciliations. Henrique's relatives alleged that Evelyn could behave aggressively. One of the most alarming incidents reportedly occurred when she climbed over the fence of Henrique's home while carrying a knife, forcing his father to intervene. Despite such episodes, the pair repeatedly resumed their relationship. Evelyn's behavior worried more than Henrique's family alone. On social media, Evelyn reportedly showed an interest in dark themes, shared content containing violent elements, used usernames with satanic references, and participated in online spaces associated with disturbing material. Some users later claimed that they had encountered her aggression online, including threats directed at girls who had contact with Henrique. The relationship between Henrique and Evelyn apparently continued, even after he began communicating romantically with Nicole. In reality, his relationship with Nicole may have been part of a manipulation intended to provoke jealousy in Evelyn. Nicole did not know that Evelyn had remained in Henrique's life and continued to influence him. The situation between Henrique and Evelyn became increasingly toxic. Nicole found herself caught between two teenagers whose relationship had gone far beyond ordinary adolescent conflict. Behind Henrique's quiet exterior was a pattern of emotional coldness and potentially dangerous behavior that would ultimately have tragic consequences. In messages to one of his friends, Henrique allegedly stated that he had started dating Nicole only after seeing Evelyn with another boy at a party. He described Nicole as a stranger and wrote that he felt disgust when he looked at her. In one message, he allegedly wrote, "I felt disgust when I looked at her." In another, he said that he wanted Evelyn back and added, "If she wants, I will kill the girl she does not like. I do not love her either." The reference was understood to be about Nicole. These statements showed not only contempt for Nicole's feelings, but also a level of emotional coldness that went far beyond a normal teenage breakup. The messages were allegedly written before Nicole disappeared. They suggested that Henrique had never viewed her as someone with whom he genuinely wanted to build a relationship. Instead, he treated her as an instrument in a conflict with Evelyn. Knowing about Nicole's feelings and her willingness to travel to see him, so he cynically used her trust. From Nicole's perspective, however, the relationship appeared real. She believed that their feelings were mutual and that he took the relationship as seriously as she did. When Henrique suggested that they meet, she had no reason to suspect a trap. Nicole could not imagine that she was only a temporary link in the unstable relationship between Henrique and his former girlfriend. Everything unfolded against the background of his efforts to win Evelyn back. He wanted her back at any cost, even if that meant removing someone whom they saw as an obstacle. Investigators later considered the possibility that Evelyn had demanded that Henrique get rid of Nicole. The available correspondence and the teenager's behavior made such a scenario appear possible, although this allegation should be treated as part of the investigative theory rather than a final judicial finding. Nicole's first visit to Henrique's house that weekend appears to have taken place on Saturday, July 12th. She stayed until Sunday. During that meeting, something happened that she had not expected. Henrique told her that he no longer wanted to continue the relationship. He offered no clear explanation and was categorical. For Nicole, the rejection was devastating. Her feelings had been sincere, and the breakup came without warning. When she returned to her grandfather's home, she appeared sad, but did not explain everything that had happened. No one recognized a specific sign that she was in immediate danger, although her emotional state had clearly changed. Despite the breakup, she remained in contact with Henrique and still hoped that they might reconcile. That hope played a decisive role in what happened next. On Monday, July 14th, Henrique contacted Nicole again and proposed another meeting. The excuse was that he wanted to explain himself or possibly restart the relationship. According to the investigative theory described in the source text, the invitation was actually a planned trap. Nicoli immediately told her grandfather that she wanted to visit Henrique again. Because she had already been to his home, no one objected, and her departure did not appear suspicious. She left during the afternoon, expecting to spend a short time there and return in the evening. This time, however, she never came back. Her family tried to reach her, but she did not answer. Concerns intensified the following day when repeated calls and messages went unanswered. Henrique's father was reportedly at home during part of the afternoon on the day of the final meeting, but said that he had not seen Nicoli. According to him, she may have arrived later after he had left for a night shift. When he returned the next morning, his son was not at home, and there was no obvious sign that a guest was still present. By then, Nicoli's family had begun taking steps to find her. Henrique's behavior immediately raised suspicion. When relatives contacted him, he claimed that he and Nicoli had broken up and that she had left his house. When asked for details, he reportedly answered evasively, avoided clear explanations, and showed little visible concern about her disappearance. His account did not seem credible. If Nicoli had truly left the house, where had she gone? Why had she not returned to her grandfather? Why had she not contacted anyone? Her relatives quickly realized that Henrique's story did not match her habits. None of her friends or family knew of any other plans. Everything indicated that she had gone to meet him and had not been seen afterward. The disappearance was sudden and unexplained. The one person who might have clarified what happened remained silent. Soon after the search began, Henrique also disappeared. He stopped answering most calls, failed to return home, and, on the rare occasions when he responded, claimed that he had fled because he was being threatened. To both his relatives and the police, his behavior looked like an attempt to escape. Nicoli's grandfather went to the police in Hortolandia and formally reported her disappearance. Her mother, Priscilla Magrin, began an active social media campaign, sharing photographs of Nicoli Fernanda Pogaray and asking the public for help. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances joined the search. News of her disappearance spread quickly, and people began sharing posts, searching for clues, and discussing possible explanations. Despite these efforts, no reliable information emerged during the following days. Henrique's beat father then reported troubling discoveries inside the house. He said that he had noticed dirt or mud marks, as if someone had entered wearing shoes after being outside in wet conditions. More alarming were stains that appeared to be blood in the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. At first, the father tried to understand what had happened without immediately contacting the police. His attempts to reach his son failed. Henrique either gave vague answers or ignored the calls completely. The father soon decided to contact law enforcement. Henrique's relatives understood that the situation had gone far beyond an ordinary teenage argument. They did not attempt to hide what had been found in the house. Instead, they asked for a forensic examination and openly stated that the traces might be connected to Nicoli. According to the narrative, they did not obstruct the investigation or try to justify the teenager. Henrique's father continued sending messages to his son, urging him to report to the police and explain everything. Most of the messages went unanswered. In one response, Henrique claimed that he was innocent and had nothing to do with Nicoli's disappearance. Meanwhile, the search continued, but Nikali appeared nowhere. There was no activity on her bank card, no new social media activity that could be confidently attributed to her, and no genuine messages or calls. Everything suggested that something had happened shortly after she went to meet Henrique. At the same time, police began interviewing relatives and acquaintances of both Nikali and Henrique. These conversations produced the first broader theory of motive. Investigators learned that the romantic relationship had begun only recently, had lasted about 1 month, and that Henrique had previously, and perhaps simultaneously, been involved with Evelyn. Police, therefore, suspected that he had maintained contact with 2 girls at the same time. The investigation moved quickly because every hour without new information increased fears of a tragic outcome. The absence of useful surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and clear telephone location data made the search more difficult. After several days, specialist teams joined the operation and investigators began following new tips. Relatives said that a wheelbarrow normally kept at the house had disappeared shortly after the suspected crime. Investigators considered the possibility that it had been used to transport Nikali's body. They also focused on a lagoon in the Jardim Amanda area, about 500 meters from Henrique's home. On July 18th, 4 days after Nikali was last known to be alive according to the principal timeline used in the source text, members of the Hortolandia Municipal Guard searched the area with a dog handler and a tracking dog reportedly named Thor. The dog was given Nikali's clothing to pick up her scent. After hours of searching, it alerted near the edge of the water. A body was found wrapped in 2 blankets or sheets and blue plastic material. Heavy stones had been placed with the wrapping, apparently to weigh it down and keep it submerged. The initial examination revealed extreme violence, including multiple stab wounds, deep cuts, severe injuries to the face and body, and partial dismemberment. Investigators concluded that the mutilation had been deliberate and intended both to conceal the crime and to make identification more difficult. An inscription was also found on Nikali's back. It consisted of the initials PCC, referring to the Primeiro Comando da Capital, a major Brazilian criminal organization. This initially created confusion about a possible motive, but law enforcement quickly rejected any genuine link to organized crime. Investigators found no credible evidence that Nikali had any connection to the criminal underworld. They concluded that the initials had probably been written in an effort to mislead police and create a false trail. The victim's identity was confirmed through several factors. Relatives recognized a black cord or choker that Nikali regularly wore, and her physical characteristics were consistent with the missing teenager. Family members, including her mother and father, were called to the scene. Their grief was witnessed by journalists and members of the search teams. Investigators said that even experienced officers were deeply shaken by the brutality. Evidence collected at Henrique's home included suspected human blood, dirt marks, household materials resembling those used to wrap the body, and indications that a bed or bedding had been burned in the backyard. The missing wheelbarrow also became part of the police theory. Investigators initially reconstructed the crime as follows. Nikali Fernanda Pogere was killed inside or in connection with the house, but first was partially dismembered, wrapped in materials taken from the property, placed on a wheelbarrow, and moved to the lagoon. The extreme violence the concealment of the body, and the attempt to imitate a criminal faction execution supported the theory that the crime involved planning rather than a spontaneous confrontation. After the body was found, investigators concentrated on reconstructing the exact sequence of events. Henrique was already being sought. During further searches, police examined an electric saw found at the property as a possible tool, although the precise role of that object required forensic confirmation. Clothing with brownish stains, believed to be blood, was also reportedly recovered. These discoveries strengthened the connection between the house and the crime. At this stage, Evelyn became a central figure in the investigation. Until then, she had not been treated publicly as a confirmed participant. New witness statements, telephone data, and the analysis of digital communications changed the direction of the case. Another important discovery concerned a message sent from Nikali's phone on July 15th, after the time when investigators believed she had already been killed. At first glance, the message could have created the impression that Nikali was still alive. Investigators later concluded that she had not written it. It had been typed and sent from her device after the suspected time of death. Police therefore believed that one of the people involved had attempted to imitate Nikali's activity in a group chat, mislead her friends and family, and delay the search. This became an important part of the reconstruction. The use of the victim's phone suggested deliberate disinformation and an effort to conceal the crime. Evidence increasingly pointed not only toward Henrique, but also toward Evelyn. Both teenagers stopped communicating with their families. Their location was unknown, and their explanations were contradictory. Their disappearance and silence were interpreted by investigators as signs that they were trying to avoid apprehension. With each passing day, the case increasingly appeared to involve a planned act committed by more than one minor. After Nikali was officially reported missing and her body was found, police focused on locating the two suspects. Although the teenagers reportedly tried to create the impression that they had fled because of outside threats, officers continued searching locally and in neighboring states. They were apprehended on July 20th, 2025, 2 days after Nikali's body was found and 6 days after the date on which she was last seen in the timeline used by several reports. Police from Sao Paulo and Paraná located Henrique and Evelyn in Cornélio Procópio, Paraná. They were staying at a house belonging to the grandmother of the teenagers. Investigators said that the relative had sheltered them without informing the authorities. The arrest occurred without resistance. Both teenagers were taken into custody and questioned. Police later stated that they admitted involvement. Henrique reportedly confirmed that Nikali had been lured to the house under the pretense of a meeting, and that Evelyn was present during the events. Henrique also allegedly stated that he and Evelyn had discussed the situation beforehand. Investigators therefore believed that the actions had been coordinated. The teenagers later claimed that Nikali had become violent after seeing them together, and that they acted in self-defense. Police said their accounts were inconsistent and continued treating the case as an intentional act comparable to feminicide under Brazilian law. The case moved into the juvenile justice process. Authorities considered the aggravating circumstances, including the extreme violence, the partial dismemberment, the concealment of evidence, the false PCC inscription, and the possible participation of more than one person. Because both suspects were minors, however, the legal consequences were governed by Brazil's child and adolescent statute rather than the adult criminal code. Investigators and Nicoli's family demanded the most severe measure permitted by law. On July 20, 2025, Nicoli Fernanda Pogere was buried in her home city of Mococa. The funeral was marked by intense grief. Relatives, neighbors, friends, and strangers gathered to say goodbye to a girl whose life had ended with shocking cruelty. Her mother, Priscila Magrin, was in profound shock and made no extended public statement on the day of the burial. Later, she made clear that she was seeking justice, not sympathy. Under Brazilian law, people under 18 are not held criminally responsible in the same manner as adults. Instead, they are subject to socio-educational measures under the Child and Adolescent Statute. The most restrictive measure can involve placement in a secure juvenile institution for up to 3 years, with periodic judicial reviews, generally at intervals no longer than 6 months, and mandatory release no later than the age of 21. After their apprehension, the two teenagers were placed in an appropriate juvenile facility while awaiting further decisions. An initial period of provisional confinement of up to 45 days was authorized. Depending on the outcome of the juvenile proceedings, the measure could later be extended, but not beyond the statutory maximum. The prospect that such a brutal crime could lead to no more than 3 years in a juvenile institution caused widespread public outrage. Social media users, journalists, activists, and public officials openly questioned whether the available legal response was proportionate to the seriousness of the acts. The case became an example of the conflict between the protective principles of juvenile law and the devastating consequences of extreme violence. Critics argued that in cases of exceptional brutality, the limits of the juvenile system could be perceived as indifference toward victims. Nicoli Fernanda Pogere's name became associated with public campaigns demanding accountability and legal reform. Her family and supporters promoted the proposed Lei Nicoli Pogere, seeking stricter responses to exceptionally violent offenses by minors and stronger action against online communities that encourage hatred and violence. The media continued to report on the case, and it was discussed in public forums and legislative campaigns. Importantly, the investigation did not remain completely closed. In late April and early May of 2026, the civil police opened a new inquiry after audio recordings presented by Nicoli's family raised the possibility that an adult third party may have participated in the dismemberment or concealment of the body. Those new allegations were being examined and had not yet been proven. Therefore, while the two teenagers admitted involvement and remained subject to juvenile proceedings, not every aspect of the crime could be treated as finally resolved. Public memory and pressure for a fuller investigation continue to shape the moral judgment surrounding the case. Thank you for watching, and take care.